Hi, I'm Mary Elizabeth Williams. Welcome to Patient. My guest today is Diana Fox Tilson. She is a psychotherapist in private practice and she writes other interests on Substack. And if you are not a subscriber, subscribe immediately because she's so enjoyable to read, just absolute pleasure. And she writes about all kinds of issues, but also specifically kind of I don't want to call it the wellness quackery, the mental health bullshit that we are all kind of immersed in. And that's what first drew me to you. So before we get into that, though, I like to ask everyone, because I think it's an interesting origin story. What was the healthcare experience for you, Diana, that radicalized you?
I was thinking about this question and it was hard to pick just one. And I think it's also been an accumulation of experiences that have radicalized me over time. And unfortunately, they just keep coming. I mean, it's like my default now is that I expect it to be a bad experience when I see a new doctor and am pleasantly surprised if it's not. But I would say that one of the first ones was in my 20s. Like many millennials in my 20s, I didn't have consistent health insurance. And so it seemed like every year I would have to switch to a new primary care provider. And I, being the like perfectionistic, uptight person that I am, when I went to see a new one at 27, I compiled a spreadsheet for him of my TSA test results from the past like 4 years or something, which showed like a real clear line that, like my TSH kept getting higher and higher and higher. And I took it to him and I said, yeah, I'm having all of these symptoms. And one of the symptoms of having hypothyroidism is that you start to gain weight. And so I mentioned that as, one of the symptoms that I've noticed. And and I was like, here you can like see that like it's getting higher and higher. And he looked at it and he didn't run any labs. And he just said to me, you just need to exercise more and go on a diet. And, and then he said, what did you eat for dinner last night? And I told him, and he's like, that doesn't sound like diet food. And then he just dismissed me, and that was that. And then it wasn't until I want to say like maybe 3 or 4 years later that I had a doctor who actually took it seriously and ran some labs. And it turned out that I had had Hashimoto's thyroiditis for at least 10 years at that point and had been suffering for at least 10 years before I found a doctor who actually took it seriously and treated it. And I would say that that was kind of one of my first experiences where I realized I couldn't actually trust doctors. And then
Yeah.
unfortunately, I've had quite a few experiences like that since then. So,
Yeah, certainly. I mean, everyone I know has a story like that. And every woman I know has a very specific story like that, where we went to a doctor in a moment of incredible vulnerability and have been told, no, that's not it. And said, I'm not going to run the labs. I'm not going to listen to you. I'm just going to tell you. And especially when it has to do with weight. I think that's a big one, right?
well, yeah, and at
Especially.
the time, I mean, at the time, I was actually very slender. Like, I mean, I'm not going to say numbers because I don't want to trigger anyone, but I wasn't even remotely overweight at the time. But I had noticed that I was gaining weight. And I mean, I was 27, and he's like, "Oh, you're just getting older," and I'm like, "Really? Is 27 older? Like, is
Mhm.
that much older that, you know?" But yeah, I mean, that was my first. I was so naive because I hadn't had any weight stigma in medicine up until then. Now I've had plenty of it. But at the time, it was my first experience with it. And I know, you know, now I know. But at the time I didn't realize that like the minute that I mentioned weight gain, it meant that he was just going to stop listening completely and just dismiss it as, I just wasn't exercising and I needed to go on a diet. So
Right. That's the quick fix, which by the way, they always make it sound super easy too, right? Just go lose weight. Just lose weight. Okay. Right. Because if it was easy,
I
like,
mean, at the time, like I didn't actually need to lose weight. Like
right,
looking back on it now, like as an eating
right.
disorder therapist, I'm like, oh, actually, I was perfectly fine. And thank God I didn't have an eating disorder because a doctor telling you that, I mean, that's the kind of behavior that triggers eating disorders for a lot of people, especially a lot of women,
For a lot of people, for a
Yeah.
lot of people, having a professional tell you that,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
that somehow, and implying that you're lazy or implying, as you said, that you're not eating a healthy diet, all of those things. Let me ask you before we move on though. So what do you do now? What do you do when you walk into a room and you feel like you're not being listened to?
I wish I had an answer for this. I'm like currently debating whether I should switch to a new rheumatologist because I just keep having consistently bad experiences with my current rheumatologist. And I mean, I think honestly, I kind of shut down. I wish I had an answer. I wish I could say like, oh, I'm really good at advocating for myself now. But the reality is that like when I get in that room and there's that power imbalance and someone is, being disdainful towards me or is dismissing my concerns, mostly I'm just thinking, what do I need to do so I can get out of here? Like, and I just behave very compliantly because I'm just thinking ahead to like, how fast can I get out of this room? And, but then you are in the position of, which is the position I'm in right now with the rheumatologist of, okay, I have to start over with someone new, probably. The next one is likely to be just as bad as the last one. I've had 3 rheumatologists in the past 6 or 7 years. They've all been bad in their own distinct way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I just keep looking and trying to find that unicorn of a provider who is better at their job. And I have found that like if I'm persistent about it, I have a good pulmonologist. And I was so relieved the first time I saw him because he was so kind to me and actually like treated me like a human and took my concerns seriously that I was almost tearful at the end of the appointment because I was just so relieved. And I have a good primary care provider. So it's like if you're persistent, you can hopefully find people who treat you like a person. But yeah, I mean, I think like my advice is like just do what you have to do to get through that appointment and then, take care of yourself once you get on the other side of it.
Right, because we don't always have great options. We just don't, even when we live in cities that are full of doctors.
Yeah.
And most people don't, by the way. Most people
Yeah.
don't have a vast array of options where they can say, okay, I'm going to go to somebody else now, especially when you're looking at specialists. It's
Yeah.
not easy. And we can talk about what the ideal would be. And the ideal might be I just take my business somewhere else and I find someone better. But the reality is, that is not always possible for all of us. And
It's
that's why I
such a good
really
point.
appreciate your very practical, clear-eyed. Sometimes you just got to figure out how to get through it.
Yeah.
Yeah, just figure out how to get through it. Let's talk about now what I love to read from you, which is this debunking that you do of some very you take big swings at some big figures. Talk to me about how that evolved, why you wanted to do that, and what you see in your online life, but also in your practice about what people are bringing to you because they've read some bestseller with a pithy catchphrase for a title.
Yeah. I think that what inspires me to do this is, and I wrote about this. So I wrote this series, right? Debunking Pseudoscientific Pop Psychology. And in the very first one, I wrote this in the intro that I got angry because I had a couple of experiences all within like clustered within a few weeks of each other of clients coming to me and saying things like, I have one who's in her 20s and she was diagnosed with a recurrence of thyroid cancer. And she was in tears because she said, this is my fault. It's because I didn't process my trauma. And then I had another one who came to me and was saying, "Oh, I finally lost the weight, and it's probably because my body finally released my trauma." And I was like, "No, I think it's actually that you've been taking Ozempic for the past 6 months. I think that's the more likely explanation for it." And then a reader who had read, I wrote about how I'm estranged from my mother, and I've also written about how I have, a couple of autoimmune illnesses, and I really do think that this person actually meant well, but she read both of them and then commented that it was no surprise that I had autoimmune illnesses, given the fact that I had an abusive mother as a child. And so all of these kind of just happened at the same time. And I was like, you know what? I'm just so tired of this. I think that as someone who does have chronic illness and who, specializes in working with people with chronic illness in my practice, there's so much stigma already and there's so much judgment. And I mean, you've been very ill in the past. I'm sure you've probably experienced this too, right? It's like people want to think that it's your fault somehow if you're sick, and that there must be something that you did wrong or something that you didn't do that you should have done, and that if they can blame you for being ill, then it protects them, because if they just do all the right things, then they won't get sick. And so, and it's the way that the ideas in books like The Body Keeps the Score have filtered into the popular imagination. A lot of people have just absorbed this idea that if they do develop a chronic illness, that it must be their fault somehow, and that it's related to them not adequately processing their emotions. And that's not actually how bodies work.
No, and I think I was thinking about this recently. I think the problem is you start with these books. We'll also talk about Let Them and some of the other books that you've discussed. It starts with this very shaky premise to begin with. These books are not built on solid ground, and then people read them, but then other people don't even read them.
Yeah, a
And
lot of
they
people
get
haven't actually read them.
and
Yeah,
they get some of the big talking points, and that is enough for them to then metabolize them in a way that is like, it's my fault. I did this. I have to process my trauma, and that will heal me. That's why I have these issues. And then also, just kind of, and then I'll be okay. And it's also, I have an explanation, a
yeah,
reason that
exactly.
I'm in control of. And listen, as you said, I've been sick, you've been sick. You want control. You'd love to have control.
Yeah, yeah. It creates the illusion of control, but it's just an illusion. And then I mean, like over the years, I've been a therapist for 15 years now, and people come to me and they think that there's some magical process that they're going to engage in where they're going to release their trauma, and that that's going to protect them from ever becoming chronically ill. And like that, it's not like, I mean, I wrote about this, but that's not actually a thing. Like it's not. You can process your traumatic experiences. If you are actively having symptoms of PTSD, which I can go into more detail about what those symptoms actually are, if that would be helpful for people. But in a nutshell, it's if you're having, the trauma, what we call trauma re-experiencing symptoms, meaning like intrusive thoughts, nightmares, flashbacks, like that's then you can get treatment and you can process the trauma and stop having those symptoms. But most of the time when people are coming to me saying that they need to release their trauma because they're worried that their trauma is going to make them ill, they're not actually having any of those symptoms. They just have this vague idea that like their traumatic experiences are being stored up in their body, and that they need to do something special to release it.
And
And
I
it's
think
magical thinking.
right. It is magical thinking. And I think there is also a lot of confusion regarding PTSD and trauma in general. And you can have
Absolutely.
had traumatic experiences and not have PTSD. And that
Yes.
PTSD usually refers to a very specific cohort of, as you said, symptoms. It is not meant to be something you necessarily are carrying for the rest of your life
Yes.
either. Right?
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. And I mean that like when people are built to be resilient, most people will have experiences that could be traumatizing. This is the other thing I took issue with Van der Kolk and some of these other writers, is that they are you can point to anyone's life and find something that was potentially traumatizing in it. That doesn't mean that we all have trauma. When I think about like the experiences that I've lived through that did not cause me PTSD, I've had more of them than not. I lived through the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989 as a child. It did not have a trauma response to that. I lived through 9/11 living in lower Manhattan. I did not have a trauma response to that. Many people did. I personally didn't. I mean, and there's like, we are actually built to be resilient. Just because you have gone through something in the past that could have potentially been traumatizing, that doesn't mean that you actually have trauma. And I don't know, I think maybe people get so defensive about those books because to question The Body Keeps the Score seems to land for some people as invalidating their trauma. So I don't know if people will also hear me saying, oh, you can live through traumatic experiences and not be traumatized, and also take that as invalidating, which is not my intention. But I think if you're traumatized, you probably know it. and I mean, I could get into like how the word trauma has become so meaningless now
Hmm.
because people apply it to every little experience, But if you are having symptoms of PTSD, especially those, those trauma reoccurring symptoms that I described, whether, intrusive thoughts, nightmares, flashbacks, if you know that that's happening to you, there's no question about it, you know. It's not something that's mysteriously happening on some subconscious level that you're not aware of. Like,
Right. And that's why my foot hurts or whatever. Right. And
and
all
that's
of
why my foot hurts.
Right. And also, I think we can say, yes, stress and trauma manifest in our bodies. We
Yes.
have experiences, we have symptoms. Maybe it's headaches, maybe it's pain, whatever, like whatever, it's stiffness. Those things are real. And there is absolutely a connection between that and stress and
Yes.
anger and other things that are going on in our minds. It doesn't invalidate that. What we're talking about is this kind of junk science around it
Exactly.
and weeding through that and understanding that nothing is 100% wrong, nothing is 100% right, and to understand that there are elements in these books that actually make sense, that are thought-provoking, and the dialectic, and also let's put on our bullshit detectors. I want to ask you also because I touched on let them and you and I have also discussed that theory and the idea of estrangement. You and I both know what estrangement feels
Hmm.
like. And on the one hand, estrangement is huge right now. I think 1 in 4 Americans say they're estranged from a family member. It can feel like a quote unquote epidemic. It can feel like, to outside eyes, that people are just cutting people off willy-nilly and we're just giving up on our harder relationships because it's too much work or we disagree politically. You and I know that's not how it goes. But the shaming around that, the absolute judgment of people who haven't been through these experiences
Yeah.
is hard. I'm sure you and we both heard it from people. What does it
Yeah.
really look like to be inside estrangement?
I imagine it's different for different people. For me, it's been liberating. I stopped talking to my mother in my early 20s, and it was the first time in my life that I can recall not feeling depressed anymore. When within about 6 months or so of when I stopped talking to her, this weight that I had been carrying around for my entire life was lifted off my shoulders. And when I realized how much better I felt not having her in my life, that was when I decided that I wasn't willing to go back to the way I had been living before, where I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop and dreading her next phone call. And, I'd say that like my mental health just dramatically improved. And whereas I would say that as a child and teenager, I pretty consistently had major depressive episodes and not even episodes, but just consistently had major depression. I stopped talking to her, and within a few months, my depression lifted, and I haven't had a major depressive episode since, and it's been, 20 years.
Wow. Yeah. And I also want to say, I don't want to speak for you, but I know other people I know who have gone through this, and I can speak from my own experience. You may still really love that person. And you may really miss that person because abusive relationships are often entangled with those other feelings. And you may have really beautiful, happy memories with that person as well. None of that is negated by
Mm,
estrangement. It's a choice about where you want to be now. And now that my mom is dead, I feel like I can feel gratitude for the experiences we had that were really positive and were
yeah,
really loving. Because again, it's not always 100% one thing. And I
yeah,
think people
yeah.
mistake estrangement for, well, that's it. They're the bad guy. I'm the good guy, or I'm the bad guy. They're the good guy. As opposed to, yes, there's obviously different dynamics. It's not well, it takes two people to tango kind of thing, but that you can still miss somebody that you're estranged with.
I'll be honest, I don't actually miss my mother.
That's fine. That's totally fine.
She's listening to this, she'll find out. And I think my family, especially on her side, my extended family on her side, was very judgmental about the fact that I was pretty open about the fact that my life was measurably better without her in it. I think that an outlier, though. I think most people have less extreme experiences with their parents. And that being said, I mean, there are qualities that I appreciated about her. It's not all black and white. But she left when I was 7, and I saw her pretty rarely after that. And I mostly saw her because she was trying to use me for something, whether she was trying to use me for childcare or, so most of my experiences with her were of her exploiting me one way or another, and I don't miss that at all.
That's totally, yeah, I get that completely. By the way, we just had a cameo from the dog, and I love that. Just got a little somebody coming in to join you. I want to ask you one last thing because I was so intrigued by this very provocative essay you wrote about motherhood and what life might be like without becoming a mother. And you said you got some interesting responses to that.
About would my life have been better if I hadn't had children, and
Yeah,
we'll never know.
right.
Yeah. I don't remember what were my interesting responses about it.
You said that there were some people who really gave you guff about it.
That's so funny. I think this is why I can endure on the internet, because I've already forgotten whatever unkind things people said to me about it. Mostly I got a lot of positive responses to that one too. I think a lot of women found it relatable. This idea that there could have been a different path for you, there could have been a different life, and would that have been a happier path? I mean, I think for me it's complicated by the fact that my arthritis, a couple of my autoimmune illnesses were triggered by pregnancy. And so I haven't had a day without pain since I became pregnant, 11 years ago. And I love my children. And it's also silly that I even have to have that caveat that, I'm not saying that I regret the existence of my children. But I think if I had known that I would be in pain every day for the rest of my life, if I decided to have children, I might have made a different choice.
Yeah, I think that there's the conversation, even though we are, well, I was going to say, even though we're here at this point in history, especially because we're here at this point in history, the idea that your highest and only calling in life is to be a mother is so pervasive. And when I hear things like most important job in the world and the best job in the world, I had a reader comment to me recently about how this was the year I made peace with the fact that I'm not going to have children, which was something she wanted.
Mm,
And I think it's really important, especially for those of us who are mothers, to be out there saying you can have a great, valuable, maybe even better life
yeah,
without kids if that is your path.
yeah,
Because the idea, the weight of, the burden of, if you haven't had kids, you are not a true woman. You are not fulfilled as a woman, is so insidious and I think so toxic.
yeah, agreed. Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting because there's a lot of like fear mongering around like, oh, you better have kids or you're going to regret it. And the thing that this is not a popular opinion, but like a lot of mothers actually have maternal ambivalence, and in the privacy of a therapy room, women will admit that they regret having children and that they wish they had made a different choice. But we don't talk about that because that's not, no one wants to publicly say that they regret having children for good reason, because if your children read that, it's going to hurt their feelings. But it also means that like there's not a very loud voice countering all of the fear mongering, saying that you're going to regret it forever if you don't have children.
Yeah, and I don't know how you feel about your mother, but I know my mother's life would have been so much better if she hadn't had kids.
I
I,
think
you
that
know,
to my grandmothers too. Neither one of my grandmothers should have had kids,
right? These
honestly.
these women should
Yeah.
not have had children. And
No.
whenever I've written that, it's like, well, then you wouldn't be here. And it's like, I know we can do that whole thought experiment, but
Right.
my mother personally, and I think her mother, yeah, also would have been happier, more fulfilled women if they
Yeah.
hadn't had the burden of motherhood pretty much thrust upon them.
Yeah, my mother would have been miserable no matter what, because she's a deeply narcissistic person who is the architect of her own misery.
Yeah.
So I think there, which is, it's sad. It's just kind of tragic for her that I don't think there's really a path to happiness for her,
Hmm.
sadly. So I think she would have been unhappy either way. In my mom's case, I mean, she had children for very calculated reasons. I mean, she had children to entrap men into marrying her. Like both of, she's had, last time I checked, 4 marriages now, but at least 2 of them she, had shotgun weddings. And so I don't think that she necessarily even became a mother out of like any of the typical motivators
Yeah.
that
Wow.
healthier people are motivated by to become moms. So yeah, I mean, I think she shouldn't have become a mom in the sense that she wasn't really interested in actually raising children. She was really deeply disinterested in raising children. We were just, pawns for her, which is why I don't miss
Right.
her.
Yeah.
But
No, I get
I think most people probably have more positive experiences with their moms than I did. But
I get that. And I think I also often would say, I wish there were times in my life where I really wished I had a mom. I
oh,
would
all the
not,
time, all the
right? Like,
time.
what if I had like a mom, a real mom? And
Oh
that's a
yeah.
different feeling too. It's not like I am opposed to being cared for, right?
Oh, I think
Right?
that I will always have a mother-shaped hole in my heart for that
Yeah.
reason. And I'm 43 now and I haven't outgrown the desire to have a mom. And I have this urge to connect to women who are old enough to be my mom, because I'm just kind of always yearning for that connection. And it's just, and I've had to just accept that, I imagine this is maybe what being an orphan feels like, where it's just that need is just never actually going to be met, and I can get by without it. But I'm sad about that.
Yeah, and I think learning to live with the hand you've been dealt and the sad parts of it and also to understand that it's like this could have been better, but that doesn't
Yeah,
mean that this isn't good,
right.
right? That's the difference. One more question before you go. You've debunked a lot of really shitty, well, pseudoscience wellness books. Is there a person you admire or someone you think, a thought leader that you think is doing it right?
Everyone keeps asking me that question, and I so wish that I could point to someone and say, read this book instead. And
Hmm.
I'm planning a future post on my Substack where I bought like a huge stack of, pop culture trauma books to see if any of them are worth reading. But the problem I think that we run into is that the reality of trauma science is actually that it's quite nuanced and there aren't clear black and white connections between if this happens to you, then that's the result. And it's hard to sell a book that has nuance. You know, there's not a huge market for it. One of my Substack friends, Molly Dickens, she writes the Maternal Stress Project, and she was shopping a book last year about maternal stress. And she had a hard time finding a publisher because the commercial trade publishers were saying, oh, this is too academic for us. And the academic publishers were saying, this is too commercial for us. And so she's still looking. And I think that that exemplifies the problem is that something that's going to be picked up by a trade publisher that's going to have a large audience is unlikely to be nuanced.
Right. Because if you can't blurb, this has the answer.
Yes, exactly.
This is the answer. Just read this and fix your life.
Right.
It's hard to sell it. Absolutely. Well, great. So you're saving us all some money, so that's good.
I mean,
We
that
can,
being said, like I did buy this big stack of books and I'm working my way through it gradually.
great.
But I'll be honest that I'm not like super optimistic, which is sad because I do feel like there is a need for that. Like people want to understand their trauma. They want to understand what is the link between, chronic illness and chronic stress. And it's a book worth reading if someone writes it and if someone will publish it.
Yeah.
So
And in the meantime, we can use the money we would spend on books on therapy instead. Let's do that,
there you
right?
go.
Let's do
Right.
that. The most important question I have to ask you is what's the dog's name?
This is Momo.
Momo. Okay. Well, Diana and Momo, thank you both so much for talking to me today. I really,
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it. And it's really important, I think, for us to be able to have these conversations in solidarity with other people who have lived through trauma and estrangement and know that you can have a really great life on the other side of
Yes.
it. Really.
Yes.
Yeah.
That
So
is what
there.
I want the takeaway to be is one, don't worry about trying to release your trauma if you don't even know if you have trauma. And even if you've been traumatized, you can have a wonderful life. Like It doesn't stop you.
You're not broken.
You're not broken.
You're not broken. All
You're
right.
not broken.
You're not. All right. We're not broken. Thank you, Diana. I need to hear that. We all need to hear that, right? And if we're a little chipped, that's okay. We can work with that. All right.
Yeah,
Thank you so much,
exactly.
Diana. Have a great rest of your day. It was wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.